that President Trump truly deserves the Nobel Peace Prize because he's already ended the Iran war 8 times. Will the 9th time prove the charm after his latest decision to call off a military escalation in search of a peace deal with Iran? Now, that's how the Wall Street Journal begins its latest editorial. John, what's going on here?
Well, I think that President Trump is flailing around. When the war started on February 28th, we launched this massive air campaign in conjunction with the Israelis against the Iranians. And that lasted until April 8th. So it went from February 28th to April 8th. And it was really our Sunday punch. And it failed. And on April 8th, President Trump declared a ceasefire. And since then, he has been searching for an alternative way to, in effect, win the war, or at least allow himself some sort of attractive exit strategy. And he's been unable to do that. And the reason is that Iran has won the war and we have lost the war. And President Trump just refuses to accept that. So what he constantly is doing is he's threatening to bomb Iran back to the Stone Age or do something of that sort. But then when the moment of decision comes, he invariably backs off. And then he goes back to that same strategy in a few more weeks. And again, what he's doing here is he's flailing. He got himself into a disastrous situation. He got himself into a war where there is no plausible strategy that will allow him to win or allow him to save face. So he continues to flail around.
But I mean, things can only get worse for him in the sense that because he says his decision to cancel the attack at the weekend, quote, is subject to being able to rapidly make a deal. But presumably Tehran will refuse to surrender its strategic leverage over the Strait of Hormuz. John, why would Trump then agree to another deal if it doesn't guarantee freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz?
2 points, Tom. One is you and I have both argued for a long time on this show, the longer the war goes on, the more coercive leverage the Iranians have. And all sorts of statements come out of Tehran where prominent people in the leadership of Iran say that they have a vested interest in not rushing to get a deal because they believe, and I think quite correctly, that time is on their side. Now, the problem that President Trump faces, and the Iranians, of course, understand this, is that the economy is getting closer to the cliff the more time wears on. If you look at what we're doing in terms of taking oil out of the strategic petroleum reserve, if you look at what's happening on the inflation front and so forth and so on, there are all sorts of reasons to be deeply concerned about where the international economy is headed. And furthermore, President Trump has the midterm elections coming up, and he knows full well, and the Iranians know full well, that he does not want this unpopular war to continue in the run-up time to the midterm elections. So President Trump has a deep-seated interest in ending this as quickly as possible. But the question is, how does he do it? As I said to you before, he does not have a plausible military strategy. He has no theory of victory. So at some point, he's going to have to surrender, which is what he did actually on June 17th when he signed the Memorandum of Understanding. That was a surrender document, but he ultimately could not accept it. And therefore, he violated the Memorandum of Understanding. But the argument I would make is that moving forward, he's going to have to agree to another Memorandum of Understanding because he has to shut this one down. And going back to my first point, I think that will be a tougher pill to swallow, that second Memorandum of Understanding, than the first one was.
Yeah, but Trump would say that it was Iran that violated the Memorandum of Understanding by continuing to attack shipping that attempts to transit the strait without its permission. John?
I don't think that's true. I think if you read Article 5 of the Memorandum of Understanding, which I've probably read about 10 times now, it says that Iran and Oman will be responsible for controlling the strait in the 60-day period in which the negotiations that follow the MOU take place. After that, they'll decide what happens. But in the 60-day period, Iran mainly and Oman to a lesser extent will decide what ships go through and under what conditions. It says nothing about the United States in Article 5. So I
Okay,
think
but
Americans,
still spiral out of control. Could we still be on an escalation trap? John?
well, I think as far as the Saudis are concerned, or any of the Gulf states, they have zero interest in seeing Trump uh, escalate in the serious way he's been threatening. And in fact, all of the news reports say that MBS, the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, talked to President Trump at great length yesterday, Saturday here, and convinced him in good part not to attack. So it's not going to escalate because of the Saudis. That's not to deny that the Saudis foolishly picked a fight with the Houthis, but that's another matter.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, with regard to the Iranians, I don't think the Iranians have a vested interest in provoking the United States to attack Iran the way President Trump has threatened. I would note, however, and I found this quite surprising, and it somewhat contradicts what I just said. Kuwait on Saturday, it's yesterday here, Kuwait, the Iranians attacked Kuwait yesterday. It was not a tit for tat operation where the United States had attacked Iran and Iran was attacking Kuwait in retaliation. Iran just decided yesterday, Saturday, to attack Kuwait. And this is the day when President Trump was threatening to escalate. So it was quite clear to me that the Iranians feel that they can poke him in the eye and get away with it. But I still don't think they want a full scale war. I think if this escalates, it will be because President Trump is desperate. I think if you listen to Paul's description of Trump's situation and my description of Trump's situation, which were pretty much the same, he is in a desperate situation. And as I know from having studied a lot of international relations over the years, sometimes when states get into desperate straits, they do foolish things. And it is possible that President Trump may just gamble for resurrection and, throw caution to the wind and launch the dogs. I don't think that's going to happen. I think he's going to move in the other direction, but who knows for sure.
Mind you, we've both said this so many times during the course of the last few weeks and months, and things always change again.
In a way, that's true, Tom, but in a way, it's not, which gets back to our earlier discussion. Trump threatens, then he backs off. Trump threatens, then he backs off. So, in a way, it doesn't really change that much. I want to respond to what Paul said. You want to remember, Paul and Tom, that last year, this is in 2025, the United States and Israel launched the limited war against against Iran. It lasted 12 days from June 13th to June 25th of 2025. And the war ended for two reasons. One is that the Israelis and the Americans were running out of missiles to shoot down the incoming Iranian ballistic missiles. And all of this tells you that even with a limited war, the fact is that those Iranian ballistic missiles and Iranian drones, for that matter, are a deadly threat. And knocking them down and protecting Israel or protecting the Gulf states is a very difficult task, even in a limited war. The second point I would make to you is that Trump got wind back in the June 2025 war that the Iranians were thinking about shutting down the strait, and he got spooked. And that was the second reason that we were so anxious to end the war. And many people argued at the time, and I was one of them, that from an Iranian point of view, they were foolish to agree to end the war in June of 2025. They should have continued the war. They should have shut down the strait, and they should have continued firing ballistic missiles at Israel, because Israel and the United States no longer had a significant capability to knock those incoming missiles and drones down. But anyway, all of this is to say that if you launch a limited war, you run into many of the same problems that we have run into when President Trump launched this massive attack. To start, as Paul said earlier in the discussion, we do not have a rational legal decision making process in the national security realm. It's not like this was a staffed issue. Like President Trump said, I'm thinking about attacking Iran. Would people uh, look into this issue and give me a comprehensive assessment of whether it makes sense or not? That did not happen at all. And that's not President Trump's style. President Trump is a guy who flies by the seat of his pants. He thinks he's a genius, and he thinks this applies to every issue. He doesn't really believe he has to listen to other experts because he knows more than they do. And he's certainly not into staffing problems. So there was no staffing of this issue. But what happened is clear from all the media reports and the new book you talked about, Tom, is that Prime Minister Netanyahu and David Barnea, who was the head of Mossad at the time, believed that if we hit Iran with a shock and awe campaign on February 28th, that would produce a magical victory. As Paul said before, this is foolish thinking in the extreme. It is. It was crazy. But they convinced Trump. And what's interesting is, according to all the reports that are available in the public, almost all of his key advisors told him it was a bad idea. And this includes people like Marco Rubio and John Ratcliffe, who are very pro-Israel and both very hawkish. And with regard to General Kane, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and who President Trump appointed to that position, Kane told him that he had serious doubts it would work. And Kane, from the get-go, was telling Trump that we had significant limits on what we could do because of the munitions problem. So Trump was told by his principal advisors, maybe not Hegseth, but Rubio, Vance, Ratcliffe, and General Kane, all of them had serious doubts, if not opposition, to this enterprise. But President Trump decided to listen to Netanyahu and Barnea and attack on February 28th. And as his principal advisors understood, it was destined. The argument here is that Iran has problems, and that's correct. Iran has problems. There's no way any country fighting a war, whether you are the United States in World War II, the Soviet Union in World War II, Britain in World War II, that you're not going to have some problems. And there's no way that you're going to avoid significant suffering. It just comes with the territory. The question you have to ask yourself is, do you think there's any serious evidence that these problems are pushing the Iranians to throw up their hands and surrender? I would submit that there is zero evidence of that. I don't know anybody who can point to any evidence that these problems, and let's grant what he says, that there are problems, that these problems are having consequences that might lead Iran to surrender. Two other points. One is, when the United States and Israel punish Iran the way they are punishing Iran since February 28th, and in fact, before February 28th, it actually has a rally around the flag effect. You want to remember that President Trump talks about dealing with Iran in genocidal terms. And when you talk about dealing with Iran in genocidal terms, when you talk about putting them back in the Stone Age, that's going to cause Iranians to rally around the flag, which cuts against the Walter Russell Mead line of argument. Second point I'd make to you is that we have a rich history of countries being pummeled by their adversaries, and huge numbers of people dying in those countries. Japan in World War II, Germany in World War II, North Korea during the Korean War, Vietnam, and so forth and so on. And in every one of those cases, the countries did not surrender because the population was being pummeled or being punished or was being deprived. People are willing to suffer, especially when they think they face an existential threat. And the Iranians believe they face an existential threat. Again, listen to President Trump's rhetoric. He presents the United States and Israel as an existential threat to Iran. He's going to bomb them back to the Stone Age. In a situation like that, I just don't think the fact that a country like Iran suffers as much as it does suffer is going to matter very much in terms of causing it to throw its hands up and surrender.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with everything that Paul said. And I would just add to that that Trump has 2 more years left. He's 80 years old, and there's all sorts of evidence that his cognitive faculties are not what they once were. And when you marry that to the fact that he's flailing, that he is in a situation where he's likely to suffer, very likely to suffer a humiliating defeat, one would think that his behavior is only going to get worse with the passage of time. It's not going to get better. So I think that the United States is in a lot of trouble. And for all the reasons that Paul laid out, our allies are in deep trouble. You know, Henry Kissinger used to joke or say tongue in cheek that the United States treats its allies worse than it treats its adversaries. I think historically that's not been true. And I think we all understand what Kissinger was getting at. Nevertheless, I think one could argue when it comes to Trump, us treat our allies worse than our adversaries. And what's really bizarre about it is he takes a certain satisfaction in that. I think he likes slapping our allies around because he knows our allies depend heavily on us for their security. And therefore, he's in a position where he can slap them around and get away with it. But as Paul said, this is disastrous. First point that our influence in the Middle East is going to decrease as a result of this war. Our basing structure in the Gulf, our alliance structure in the Gulf are badly damaged. And it's quite clear that we're not going to be able to have as much influence in the Middle East moving forward as we had before February 28th. I think there's no question about that. On the third point that Fareed makes about our influence around the world, our reputation, our soft power, as we were talking about 5 minutes ago, there's no question we've done enormous damage. And to use Robert Zelek's famous terminology about a responsible stakeholder, the United States certainly does not look like a responsible stakeholder, as I think all three of us could agree. And the fact is, the Chinese do look like responsible stakeholders, whether you like their political system or not. They look like they are acting in a rational, legal way. So I think on those two dimensions, Fareed is right. His second point had to do with power. My view on power.
We're more reliant on Chinese technology.
Okay, on Chinese technology. Look, there is no question that the Chinese are fully capable of giving us a run for our money when it comes to developing sophisticated technologies. And if you asked me who's going to win that arms race over the next 20 years, if I was being honest with you, I'd say I really don't know. And I really don't want to bet against the Chinese. As an American, I hope we win that technology race hands down. But again, I don't know. The Chinese are truly impressive when it comes to their ability to develop sophisticated technologies like AI, quantum computing, 5G, and so forth and so on. And it may be the case that they best us in that race in the years to come.